and a very warm welcome to Security Analysis only on Bharat First. I am Srivastava. In today's episode, we shall be decoding Pakistan's national security policy. It's the first document of its type from Pakistani establishment. This document was released in second week of January and took 7 years in the making. The public version of the document has 48 pages. There is a classified part of this document almost of equal length that is not in the public domain. It outlines Pakistan's national aspirations and security goals. For the first time, Pakistan has placed its citizens at the heart of its national security policy. Also, for the first time, it keeps economic goal on top, toppling defense goal as the first ranker. It has all the necessary jargon like emphasis on human rights, zero tolerance to terrorism, religious freedom, equality, gender neutrality, etc. That would be needed for the global audience to boost the sagging image of Pakistan as a state that is hub of international terrorism and looking for another bailout package from International Monetary Fund. While talking about USA, it refers to camp politics while being entrapped itself in Chinese camp. This and some other statements make document less credible and more cosmetic. Document appears extensive on paper but lacks clarity on many fronts as to how the government of Pakistan and its federating units can achieve the stated objectives. It talks about 100 years of peace with India so that they can focus on reviving their economy while calling democratically elected government of India fascist with hegemonic designs. Is it possible to achieve any progress in relationship with this rhetoric and thought? Will it be possible on practical grounds? According to the doctrine, they would like to resolve dialogue with India over Kashmir issue and resume trade with India for geo-economic growth. Will it be possible? To discuss this and more, I am joined by two very eminent speakers and writers. I have a great pleasure in welcoming them and introducing to you. My first guest is Lieutenant General Asit Mistry, who is a Director of Defense and Strategic Studies, Raksha University, Gujarat. He's a keen Pakistan watcher. Welcome, General. My second guest is Group Captain Murli Menon, who has direct knowledge of dealing with Pakistani establishment. He was in Indian High Commission, Islamabad, as an air advisor. Group Captain is also credited with making the doctrine for the Indian Air Force. Welcome, Group Captain.
Thank you.
Let me start with General. General, what do you think is the strategic importance of this document from global standpoint or Indian standpoint?
So from a global standpoint and from India's standpoint, we need to realize that this is a document published by the, in inverted commas, the selected government of Pakistan. As you all know, that the security and foreign policy are two domains which are totally controlled by the Pakistan Army, irrespective of who forms the government. So this is evidently an exercise in trying to do an image makeover. The document that has been released in the open domain is very glib in its approach to national security. It talks about focusing on economy. It talks about geoeconomics taking the center stage. It talks about the external imbalance, the horizontal imbalance, and the vertical imbalance, and how it tries to put the citizen at the center stage of national security. However, it is devoid of any details. It is devoid of how it intends to achieve what it proposes to achieve. And therefore, it is more an exercise in image makeover. Pakistan is truly perceived as a security state. You know, it has always spread this canard of an existential threat from India. And as you rightly mentioned, that in the recent past, it has become an international pariah, primarily because it is the font of the global terrorism. It has been facing severe observations and actions by the Financial Action Task Force of the UN on the issue of support to terrorism. So this document is more an exercise in image building and image makeover. How far will it change the actual behavior and conduct of Pakistan? Only time will tell.
So, General, I come back to you again. Let me go to Group Captain, who has the direct knowledge of Pakistani establishment. Group Captain, my question to you is, do you see any nuggets in this document which are good either for Pakistan or for India? Do you think anything worthwhile which we must carry home from this document?
Normally, when you have a document of any sort coming out of the defense establishment of any country, you should feel happy about it in the sense that at least it shows that the the principle of doctrinal moorings of the a fighting force requires is being established. And Pakistan, I must say, in my interactions with them, including with I distinctly remember meeting the late Air Chief Marshal Musharraf Ali Mir and chatting with him about doctrine specifically, because that time we had just written the Air Force doctrine here in India. And he actually poo-pooed it, saying that he didn't believe that his Air Force needed a doctrine. And he said they're a tactical entity, and they don't need any high-fangled stuff like doctrines and things like that. Even in our Air Force, we started writing the doctrine, we didn't really know what we are going in for. That's why the first chapter we put the need for a doctrine. Now, this particular document we are discussing today about is a national security policy document. It definitely doesn't seem to appear to be a doctrine. The information available with us are far too sparse for us to really make a holistic assessment of the document per se. But we can, from what has come out in the media, analyze it from that point of view and see whether is there any change, either tiger changing its spots, so to say. I don't think so. Especially things like civil military relations. I don't know how much of it's mentioned. I had experience to actually sit in on certain seminars by default, because in fact sitting in for the ambassador at times in Islamabad and hearing firsthand serving and retired military people in Pakistan talk derogatorily about the civilian dispensation. Now, however much in any democratic setup you disagree with the civilian setup, you do not articulate that in public. And a document like this, now who's it addressed to? Is it they say that they're going in from a military centric perspective to a civilian public centric perspective. So if it is so, then they should be talking about other things like what do the civilian population have to benefit from the military, things like the military's role in peacetime, civil military relations, and so many other things. But actually, in Pakistan, as we know, the military's had it too good for too long, and so they are used to being kowtowed and really being put on a pedestal. In fact, I distinctly remember, we used to be taken on some very good tours surprisingly, by the ISI used to take us around on trip in Pakistan Air Force aeroplanes. And distinctly remember the people who used to escort us, who were actually uniformed people from the ISI, they were so rude with the civilians. They should literally, butt them with the rifles to make way for our entourage when we used to be visiting various places. So that just shows that they had no time or inclination to listen to what the civilians had to say, and we all know that's how it's played out right through. So my personal view is that this document, whatever it may be, in whatever form it finally will be put into practical use, I don't think it means anything at all for any Pakistan watcher in terms of a military's change in mindset.
So, General, I'll just come back to you. Uh, What do you think? Can there be a peace with in the backdrop of cross-border terrorism? And though the doctrine talks a lot about zero tolerance for terrorism, I don't know what do they mean about it. Do they mean zero tolerance to terrorism as far as they are concerned? And they are not bothered about the terrorism emanating from their soil in other countries. So, what are your thoughts on this? How this document is going to blend all this with their national or strategic messaging?
Well, when Pakistan talks about its own internal security, it does project terrorism as a major threat to its internal stability. But which terrorism are we talking about? On one hand, they have adopted support to terrorism as a part of state policy. If you look at the chapter that deals with defense and territorial integrity, let me read out. It talks of strategic stability. It says a full spectrum deterrence within the precincts of credible minimum nuclear deterrence in concert with our conventional military capabilities and all elements of national power. So, which are these other elements of national power that they are talking of when they talk of deterrence? It is the strategic asset that they have created over last 3 or 4 decades. First, they tried the same stunt in Punjab, and thereafter they have been targeting J&K as well as rest of India. So on one hand, they have adopted support to terrorism as part of their state policy. And when the hand that feeds the Frankenstein is often eaten up or devoured by the same Frankenstein, when the same thing is coming back to pinch them, now they are talking of the cost of terrorism. But it is a homegrown terrorism. It is a terrorism that has been created by their own state.
So, it's biting them now.
Is biting them now.
Yeah.
In fact, even if you look at their relationship with Afghanistan, while they have extended the entire support to Taliban and facilitated the recapture of Afghanistan by Taliban, but it's going to haunt them. It's not going to be easy.
You're
Having
right.
established themselves in power, Taliban is going to look at their own interest or the interest of Afghanistan first and foremost. So therefore, there is going to be serious challenges. You already seen a little bit of pinpricks along the Durand line, where there are different perceptions on either side. There is already the potential threat of Pakhtunistan or the Pakhtun nationalism raising its head. So it's not going to be easy for Pakistan to tackle these kind of challenges.
So, General, can you say a few words about Durand Line and the kind of relationship is going to happen for Pakistan, who invested so much into Afghanistan?
Well, Durand Line was the line that was demarcated during the British time between British India and Afghanistan in 1919, when Afghanistan got its so-called independence from the British Raj. Even at that time, the Afghans did not accept the alignment of Durand Line because it tended to divide the Pashtun or the Pakhtuns on either side of Durand Line.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, it has been an area of concern as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Pakistan, which claims so much of affinity with Afghanistan, has constructed a fence along the Durand Line. So there is a great dichotomy in the approach of both countries. While
Yeah,
Pakistan,
and
yeah,
there
go
have
ahead.
been some exchange of fire across the
Yes,
Durand Line in recent
recently
past.
there have been some exchange of fire. This is after the Taliban government has or Taliban has established its government in Afghanistan. Well after that.
So it brings back
So,
to Group Captain, brings back to our original point as to what this document really does for the global audience or for Pakistan itself. It talks about whole of government approach. What do they mean by whole of government approach when they talk about this in the document? Is it going to serve any purpose or is only cosmetic as we said in the beginning?
Yes, I doubt. I think, we used to talk in earlier days about the three A's which controlled the Pakistan establishment, the Allah, Army, and America. Now, Allah, of course, hopefully they're looking after them. But America, as we know, has really slowly and steadily gone away, especially post whatever happened with the Taliban in Kabul recently. And they also, in fact, denied agreement to the Pakistani ambassador designate Masud Khan to USA, who actually was the erstwhile president of the Azad Kashmir, as we call it. So the American Pakistan ties have been gradually going downhill. So with that all happening, and what was happening now in Balochistan, what happened recently in terms of the Baluch Liberation Army attacks against the Pak Army directly at places like Turbat and Quetta and two, three other places. So with all these things happening,
So
situation regarding the
I got your
document.
point. I got your point. They are so embroiled in the activities of promoting or sponsoring terrorism that it is very
Yeah,
difficult for them to get rid of it. And deep state will always come in conflict with the government of Pakistan. Anyway, General, I
yes,
would like to come to you. As I see this document, I do not find any mention of, how they have mentioned something about the war fighting, but there is no mention about cyber warfare. There's no mention about autonomous AI-backed war fighting or space. So, if a national security document comes without, or policy comes without, future war fighting trends and techniques, so it further gives us a kind of thinking that this document is just made for the global audience and just made for IMF to say that we are a peace-loving country and we are victim of terrorism, not the sponsors of the terrorism. In that context, your thoughts, please.
Sure, sir. But I'll come to that later. Can I go back to your previous question about whole of government approach?
Yeah.
And my take on this is, as far as matters of security and foreign policy are concerned, when has it not been the whole of government approach in Pakistan? It has always been the whole of government approach because, as the group captain said, it's a question of three A's. And if the army dictates, the rest fall in line.
Mhm.
That is the reason why they've been having disproportionate resources being diverted towards the defense expenditure. It is always the interest of the Pakistan army superseding the interest of Pakistan as a nation. That has always been the case since 47, 48, and that continues to remain till date. So, in a convoluted sense, it has always been a whole of government approach. There is nothing new about it. This is only putting it down paper in a different kind of manner to give a change of image. Coming back to the different domains of war fighting, well, in any case, this document does not, allude to any kind of war fighting per se. But when it does talk of deterrence, it does say that Pakistan will be prepared to deter in all five dimensions. So there is some reference to the cyber domain as well as space domain, but obviously it is short of details. So to that extent, you're right. This document is more to impress the West, the IMF and others from which Pakistan is seeking credit.
So, in nutshell, we come to one simplistic conclusion that this document actually does not change anything for the global audience or change anything for Pakistani establishment, because as long as Pakistan continues with its hobnobbing with the terrorist groups, which Imran Khan himself has accepted in one of the press conferences that they have 40 terrorist groups on their soil, which are nurtured and grown by Pakistani army. If this is the context, what they would have done good, that they would have done something or given some messaging to the world that they are very keen or very firm on decimating these groups and not letting them do anything internationally. But before we conclude, I'll come to Group Captain Menon and to you, General. for taking your final thoughts and summarized view as to how Indian audience or how our viewers should look at this document, what purpose and why. So first to Group Captain Menon, please, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't think this document, from whatever has come out in the media, is an exercise in intellectual pursuit in terms of studying a military policy or a doctrine of a fighting force. Frankly, I think it's more of an exercise to convince other people, like it was mentioned earlier by the other speakers, like IMF and other people, about what their intentions are. That there is going to be some kind of a change in their mindset. But like I earlier said, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're very much going to continue on the same track about their attitude towards terrorism per se. And so there is not going to be much of a change, because the Pakistan army just cannot detract from its basic policy of using terror as an instrument of state policy.
Thank you. General, may I have your thoughts on that, please?
Well, sir, there are a lot of inherent contradictions in this document, which raise a lot of questions. On one hand, it talks of creating Pakistan as an Islamic welfare state. At the other hand, it talks of unity in diversity. On one hand, it talks about protecting fundamental rights of all citizens. And on the other hand, there is no mention about the blasphemy laws that exist in Pakistan. True. It talks about developing the skills of the youth. But where is the investment in training the youth? Over the years, there were some very good institutes of higher learning in Pakistan. There used to be. But they've all been allowed to degenerate and have become quite useless. On the other hand, you're promoting madrasas after madrasas. So where are you imparting skills to your new generation? So while a youthful bulge in your population can be a great asset, provided you have the requisite infrastructure to provide them the skills to operate in the new world. So there are inherent contradictions and gaps, and therefore this document has to be taken with if not a pinch of salt, certainly a handful of salt, I would say. And we'll have to wait and watch how it is implemented.
That was a very good summary, General. You rightly said that the document is full of contradictions. And if Pakistan is really looking forward to go into the economic mode or go into the geo-economic connections with the rest of the world, they need to train the youth in higher learning institutions. They need to remove their own contradictions and think very hard about terrorism and sponsoring the terrorism. And as far as other governments are concerned, they also need to learn that respecting the governments which are democratically elected and dealing with them. Anyway, thank you very much. With this, we'd like to conclude. Thank you, General, and thank you, Group Captain Menon. It was really wonderful having you here. We close the session now. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.